Hi, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Dan Drake, and I'm joined with my friends and colleagues, Wendy Conquest, Jeannie Vittone, and Tim Stein. And today we're talking about a really important but difficult conversation topic. We're going to have Hope Raye on, and we're going to talk about betrayal violence, the power and control dynamics that happen with sexual secrets. So I'm excited to have her on, join us today. And I can introduce Hope when she comes on, but I'm curious, you guys, this topic brings up a lot. So I'm curious what you guys think about this particular topic as we're preparing to have Hope on.
Well, I'm really curious if Hope coined this phrase, betrayal violence, because she was kind enough to send me a copy of her magazine that she had created and published. And so it was the first time that I had heard this betrayal, the experience of betrayal being violent. So I'm really wondering about that. It's a strong phrase, a really strong phrase. And want to really learn more about how she flushes this out.
That's what I'm thinking as Hope and I had a brief moment to chat about this last year. And I'd like to hear more about, how is she putting this together? What is she thinking? How does that help clients understand what's going on and maybe make changes? But I'm curious to learn more about her thought process on this. And certainly we know there's power in holding secrets. So we can obviously talk about that too.
Yeah, I don't know where this conversation's going. It's going to be interesting. I absolutely am on the same page, and I'm looking forward to talking about power and control with sexual secrets. I find myself having a reaction and a lot of hesitancy to the inclusion of the word violence when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm curious about how this conversation goes. Maybe Hope and I will become fast friends. Well, this isn't, I like Hope. We've chatted before, but maybe we'll be on the same page at the end of this. We'll see. But I'm curious about how this conversation goes.
Sorry,
go ahead,
Dan.
Jeannie. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the purposes of this podcast is to share information, share cutting edge, look deeper into different subjects, and everyone's going to have their own thoughts or perspectives, and it's good to hear another person's thoughts and see what they're creating.
Yeah, and for our viewers and listeners, the four of us a lot of times don't agree on a variety of different topics, and that's what we want to give to you. We want to give you different perspectives, different ways of looking at things. If you're hearing one person do a podcast, you're just hearing their one single opinion. And so we wanted to spice it up a little bit and also have your minds challenged with different ways of looking at this very challenging topic of sex addiction and betrayal trauma and just intimacy within relationships.
Dan?
Yeah, well, as we're bringing Hope on, I just want to say a little bit about her. So Hope is a therapist. She also has, as a labor of love, has created a magazine for partners, for betrayed women. And it's called the Complex Partner Trauma Magazine. So it's a great resource for betrayed partners. She also hosts a podcast, and she's got a ton of resources on her website. So we're excited to join her. Hope, can you join us?
Yay.
Here I am. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Hope.
Hi, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Surprise.
Thank you. What an honor. I appreciate so much the invitation into this conversation. And I just am ready to talk with you all. I love the ethos of your show where you hold space to have difficult conversations such as this. And there's no agenda on my part to win any one of you over, but more so to just, hold the space for this new frame of thought and see if it could potentially benefit some of your listeners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a question for you, Hope, coming out of the gate. So we heard the word violence seem to be a evocative word that people kind of reacted to already. So can you tell us a little bit about what betrayal violence is, first of all, and who does it impact?
Sure. Yeah, it's a strong word. I don't like it myself. So I'll share with you about the conduct that I feel defines betrayal violence. And essentially, I should begin by saying, the work I'm doing right now is from a very zoomed out lens. I'm looking at all of infidelity. I'm not just looking at the type of infidelity that might be caused by someone who has a sex addiction, or the type of infidelity that might be caused by somebody who just doesn't care and has really narcissistic tendencies. I want to talk about all of it. I want to look at this as a field of study, because there's one thing I think pretty much all fidelity violators have in common. And I don't think psychology is doing a good job of addressing that. And what that is that they keep it hidden. And they do so for good reason, because they know the detriment it would cause their partner. They understand getting caught has a lot of negative consequences with it. In some cases, they want to continue on in the behavior. And so the idea is, there's something to look at there. There's a really glaring issue that infidelity as a general area within psychology is not really hitting the nail on the head about. So betrayal violence is a way to define conduct that has three parts. And this conduct can be done by anybody who's doing these three things. They may be guilty of perpetrating an abusive power differential. The three parts of betrayal violence are: a person maintains a committed relationship with their significant other while secretly and repeatedly violating fidelity. And thirdly, then they use abusive behavior and communication, which I define specifically as deception, persuasion or gaslighting, and exploitation of the partner's trust, finances, perhaps religious convictions. So deception, persuasion, and exploitation, they use those abusive means to withhold essential information from the partner. This debilitates the partner from being able to accurately assess their own safety and well-being. And therefore, we have a power differential that gets created amongst any other inequities that may have pre-existed this dynamic. So for instance, sometimes betrayal violence can happen in a coercive control context where there's a broader framework of violence and abuse going on. That's a little separate from what I'm going to talk about today, because I want to talk about, the pure version of betrayal violence, wherein that secret life, those sexual secrets, create the inaugural power differential, the first time someone's actively used power and control over their partner. And when that occurs, there's myriad detriment, as we all know, trauma, huge impact, attachment injuries and wounding, to name a few, that occur for the partner who's been living in a really unsafe context. Now, the key here to understand is that because of that power differential, the partner doesn't know what they don't know. And therefore, they continue investing their attachment, their loyalty. They work to bond with their partner while they're unsafe. I call it endangerment. They've been subjected to potential dangers, even relating maybe to physical dangers such as STIs, maybe financial ruin they don't know about. Many, many things are going on that they don't have the full picture of. And so as they continue bonding and connecting with their partner, they're giving to the relationship in ways they would not otherwise if they knew what they needed to know. And so when partners learn about what's been going on behind their back, there's this incredible sense of, we've called it having the rug pulled out from under you, but it hardly covers it, because what's going on there is they're saying, while I was giving my best, you were betraying me. You were giving me your worst. And so the inequity is so huge in those realizations. And we could talk more about that. That's a point in the journey I call reality collapse. But anyway, so that's a bit of an overview. Betrayal violence is a term to identify very specific conduct. It's not a diagnosis. It's not a pathology. Anyone can do it, really. Anyone who's conducting themselves in those three manners is liable to be creating a power differential.
I've got to ask this question, Hope. So the power differential, that struck me, because I think that the question I have is, do you believe that people who are violating the fidelity are consciously aware that that a power differential happens.
No, not in many, many cases.
Right, they don't know. Right, okay.
Yeah.
And so they don't know. And so then, so how is it because, so the power differential is because they are somehow pulling away from the attachment, which then the partner becomes more invested in giving more. And then that creates the differential pieces. I'm trying to wrap my head around this.
I love it. I love how you're working through it in your mind, Wendy. The power differential is found in the intention to withhold essential information from a partner, the intention to use deception, to gaslight, to take their partner out on dates and celebrate the anniversary, or bring home flowers as a gift of, to assuage their own guilt for what they're doing outside of their partner's awareness. Those kind of exploitative things, those deceptive pieces, those are the actions that have intention behind them. So whether or not someone understands that they are withholding reality from their partner in a manner that causes their partner to not be able to accurately assess what they need to know about their own safety and well-being, whether or not they've consciously articulated that to themselves, there is conscious effort in working a partner over to keep the partner from knowing the things they're trying to conceal.
And I say it in a way I often say to my clients, which I say a little different than you do, but similar concept, it sounds like. I often say, if knowledge is power, we often talk about that. Knowledge is power. What is withheld from the partner is knowledge. It's full knowledge and an intention to mislead them from knowing the full truth. And sometimes that's months, years, decades, even. So to me, I do think there's a power differential, which is what we end up, try to rebalance things in the recovery process, assuming couples are working to heal and restore together. But I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but it sounds like what you're saying. That's kind of how I talked about this and frame it to my couples.
Absolutely. And I would just take it, maybe extend it even more into control as well. So the power imbalance that you've articulated, but then also the control, the choice to reduce someone's agency, to inhibit them from having proper consent to be sexual with you when you could be exposing them to STIs, or you could just be, carrying on in an emotional affair with someone, and therefore that wouldn't be very safe for the person who's unknowing of what's going on, right? So the control means that a person's agency has been imposed on. And so when we're looking at proper equity and mutuality in relationships, we have to understand that, infidelity really is egregious behavior. It hurts, it causes betrayal, but that's not what I'm calling violence. I believe that is harmful stuff, but it's not necessarily abuse in and of itself. It's the extension into the concealing of that information, the restraining the partner from having what they need to know. It's like a straitjacket on the knowledge of a partner, and it causes the partner then to invest in ways that may not be safe for them because they don't know the context. They don't understand their own endangerment.
I want to go back to something you said, which the way you said it was a new way of saying it for me. Where the partner is putting lots of effort into the relationship, efforts to bond, efforts to connect. And, would they still do that if they knew the truth was happening? And the answer is usually no, but maybe. But what I was really thinking of, so many clients, and I know you all have had this with you as well, is so many clients come in and like, we've done couples therapy for 10 years, but the addiction or the betrayal was never shared. So now it's a whole new day and making that choice to interact or not. But the way you said it was very unique for me. So thank you for hope. Thank
Yeah,
you
I
for-
appreciate that. I mean, it's everything from planning out a retirement, moving to a new state with someone, deciding to have another child, investing at home with the children so that partner can go build their career, or supporting their partner in the career, running a ministry together. That's where things get really sticky sometimes, being the face of a ministry with someone who's betraying you, right? I mean, these are situations where a partner is liable to be exploited when they don't have enough information about what's really going on.
Mm.
And Hope, would you say that this relates to secretly viewing pornography as well as actual physical infidelity?
Yeah, I see no value in society as a whole trying to agree on what is fidelity violating behavior. I believe that's specific to every coupleship. And so there are these spoken and unspoken fidelity agreements. For those who hold a monogamous structure to their relationship, they have their rules. And whether they're implicit or explicit, the idea is fidelity is defined differently by every couple. So some couples don't think pornography is any sort of a problem. Others would find that to be deeply violating. And that's what I like about the betrayal violence terminology, is that we can all retain our own biases around different types of sexual behaviors. Whether you even believe sex addiction is real or not doesn't matter when it comes to meeting at the table for this conversation. To be able to use this language allows us to say, it's not about the sexual actions, it's about the conduct. It's about the way in which they carry on a relationship with their significant other while secretly and repeatedly violating fidelity, and then using abusive behaviors and communication to keep it hidden. And this goes on for years. Sometimes the fidelity violating behavior does stop, but very often, until the full picture has been revealed to the partner, there's still an element of endangerment, still active gaslighting or concealing of old stuff. And I would suggest that betrayal violence persists even in those cases where there's no longer any acting out or affairs or infidelity going on.
I find myself agreeing with you about the concepts you're talking about, the pain, the impact of behaviors of infidelity, of how painful it is for a partner to find out what's been going on. I find myself still being stuck on the word violence. It feels like that when we're talking about this, it feels like it's a very low bar for something to be considered as violence, and it feels like a paintbrush that's being painted across something larger. I think about Pia Melody, and when I trained with her in post-induction therapy, she initially in her trauma work, she referred to the experiences people had gone through as abusive. And she stopped doing that because it kept getting in the way of people being able to do the work, because they kept reacting to the word and it was inhibiting the healing. And so she, started talking about it as, well, this is trauma and this is pain, which is accurate. And I wonder with the same thing, I wonder how much it feels like violence is, it feels like it's an inflammatory word to put into this work. And I wonder if it gets in the way of healing for people. And
It's a great point. I mean, you aren't the first person to share with me the word feels inflammatory or too strong. And so I know you're not alone in that perception. As I have spent the last years diving into everything I could around abuse, violence, power, and control, what's happened is my definition of violence has grown or broadened to match much more than secular culture's current understanding, which I believe to be too narrow. We think of violence as guns, blood, bruises. We think of posters that they paste on the back of bathroom stalls that have a cowering, bruise-faced woman and a man holding a fist, yelling over her. And what I believe to be problematic about our current society's definition of violence is that we leave a lot of people unseen. If a woman who's had her agency removed and experienced, all the victimization of what we're talking about were to show up at a domestic violence center, they would say, oh, well, we have some power and control resources to give you. And they would hand the woman literature about coercive control, which is something different. Now, some people can experience betrayal violence within a context of coercive control, that's for sure. But she's going to not see herself on the pages of what they hand her. And so what does she do then? She will go into trauma work, around the trauma, the attachment injuries. And this is all important stuff because it's very relevant to her experience. But there's this problem, I think, with insufficient realization. When women don't see themselves, or any betrayed partner doesn't see themselves, their experience articulated in literature that talks about power and control, they are more likely to dismiss it, to own more than they should be about the problem. When people who are perpetrating this kind of inequity on their partners don't see themselves listed in the literature about power and control, because the intentions behind coercive control are much different than the intentions behind pure betrayal violence. This is about avoiding consequences. But coercive control is about demoralizing and diminishing your partner, removing their liberties and agency in order to empower the self. And so when people who are doing this stuff, this secret cheating and lying, don't see themselves articulated, their power and control is motivated much differently, they are more likely to minimize their behavior. And frankly, I believe they're not healing correctly because of this main issue. The issue is to dissolve the power differential, is that last remaining piece of work in creating safety and trust within a relationship that's trying to rebuild. So you can get all the sex addiction treatment, get your sexuality all ship shape, have a lot of good empathy skills and all sorts of great, growth happening between the couple. But if there's a power differential that still exists, then at that point, the partner who's been betrayed can't dissolve it. It's the person who's installed it, really, who has to take a look at where it is they were using power and control abusively. So,
and again, nothing that you've said I disagree with, but I don't see that as violence. Like you just said, there's a power differential. There are all these issues. We have to look at it. And from the work that we do in addiction primarily, what I hear is somebody who has done the sobriety work, but they haven't done the recovery work of owning, hey, this is what I've done. These are the amends I need to make. I need to understand. I need to change my life. I need to step into my relationships in a radically different. And I need to, from a partner sensitive perspective, I need to support my partner in sort of exploring her pain, her anger, and sort of finding a way through where we can have a rebalancing of our relationship in a way that works for us in a healthy way. All of that feels like essential work to me in sobriety and recovery. And I while I don't do work in infidelity typically outside of addiction, I think it's essential over there as well. But again, for me, I don't put that in the category, and I don't see that as being work around violence. And I just worry about I don't worry about the concept you're talking about. I think I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just have concern about attaching the word violence to it. And I did some research, and I understand that sort of like sexual violence and stuff, that there's research about there about expanding it into all of these things, and I don't know what I honestly think about that. But that's the feeling that is coming up for me. Not that I disagree with what you're saying. It's the terminology.
When you talk about that, Tim, I start thinking about with addicts that we work with, they have so much shame and so much low self-esteem a lot of the times. And so now if we're using the word violence, now the partner says, wait a minute, not only did you betray me, but your betrayal caused, was a violent act. And, I can see some partners really holding that over the addicts, and the addicts even spiraling deeper into guilt and shame, and having a harder, maybe perhaps a harder time coming up into taking, to have an appropriate ego stance and to be more empathetic and remorseful. I don't know. What do you guys think?
The other side for that for me is, and again, within the addiction realm, if an addict is doing really good work imperfect, but really doing good work, stepping into this in a way. It is, if this is the terminology that the partner has taken on, is the partner able to recognize that work and step into, if they choose to, what's happening, or have we created a barrier that the partner is going to hold on to and stay behind and use to absolutely make sure that nothing ever happens again, and we're undermining any potential for the relationship to heal by bringing this in. I
Well, couldn't the relationship work on healing by acknowledging the power differential? That part of it. I hear the concern about the word violence. I don't know where I land on that myself. I can see that being absolutely a very apt description for some folks, but not for a lot. Shoot, now I lost my point.
Can the power differential work in the
And you
relationship?
have healing. Yeah. So back to, okay, so I think that's part of the couple's work, is identifying, acknowledging the power differential and removing that as a barrier, and that being a place of healing and empathy of how that must have been for the powerless and the one who's got more power, and to rebalance that into an equitable place. I kind of feel like we talk about this often with therapeutic disclosure, right? One person had the full story, the other person did not. That's a power differential. And part of therapeutic disclosure is rebalancing that power system. I could see, if we addressed it as such, being very healing for the coupleship.
Yeah, I've got some. I mean, I love this conversation because it's so it's going to stir up a lot. I imagine for us, we're at our conversation. I imagine people listening and watching. So thank you for bringing this hope. And I know I appreciate your heart with this and how clear you are explaining it. It's interesting because I could see, yes, this is not like a knife to be wielded by the partner, and I don't think that's the intent. But I've just seen on the other side, and I primarily work with sex addicts, but when the betrayer doesn't own the betrayal, when we kind of hide around shame, and I feel like their response to shame is avoid the impact of what they've done on the partner. I think that's a lot of times what my clients want to do. I want to not see it. So I think what this does is it says, I'm not opposed to the term. I mean, yes, it's a big term, but if I can say, wow, I did something that was very harmful, and I can't just sugarcoat this. It is a big deal. It was a big deal. And what I've seen when I did, when I worked with Omar Minwalla.
But you just avoided the term.
What'd I do?
You said, I did something that was very harmful, and you didn't say violence.
Okay.
So I mean, I have no problem. Like, I did something that was very, very harmful to my partner. I've really impacted her, and getting addicts to step into that, I think, is essential in their work. And again, with the infidelity work, I think stepping into the impact that I have put on my partner is essential. I absolutely agree with that. And Hope, I just want you to hear me. I love that you're doing that work, and I love that you're bringing that message out there, because I think it needs to be heard. I just have an aversion to that term of violence or violent. I doesn't feel like it fits for me in this context.
Well, how about
let me ask Dan. So Dan, if you were in a couple session, can I ask, like, how easy or difficult would it be to say, hey, and recovering addict, what you did has a flavor or was violent? I mean, how for any of us, like, how easy or difficult would it be to say, it was violent. We have a new term called betrayal violence. It was violent.
I think I need to know personally. I think I need to know the literature better. I mean, I use terms like perpetration. I use terms like abuse. I mean, I do use those terms, and I do bring those in. And I found if I can use those I don't do it to shame somebody, but I do it to say these behaviors, deception, gaslighting, these are emotional abuse. These are psychological abuse. And I don't want to shy away from it. These are power and control dynamics for sure. So I bring that in. And I was going to say, when I worked with Omar Minwalla, we did workshops where we could name perpetration, we could name abuse. We didn't do it in a finger pointing, like, look at you, you scum of the earth or something. It was never that energy. It was always like, these things, these coping strategies you learned from a young age led you to this point. They've created huge harms for yourself and for your relationship, huge damage. I guess to go back to your point though, Wendy, I don't know. I have my conception of violence, that term is still pretty narrow, I guess. So maybe I need to read more of the literature, but I mean, I think we've shied away. I've just noticed the last few years, we don't even call sex addicts. I don't even know what we call, our terms are so loose now, I think because people get offended. And I think we do labels can be powerful. I don't want to take it on as a shame. And, this is now something that's, I have to own for the rest of my life in a shame-based way. But if I can own it and I can change behaviors, and this is something that I can work on parts of myself that I need to keep growing in, I don't see the problem in that. And I don't think you disagree, Tim, either. You're just, yeah.
I want to ask Hope about intention. And Hope, do you see a difference? If someone has intention to deceive, it's usually because they're in their addictive pattern, right? And the addiction is very large and they're very self-focused and egocentric. And so I want to continue my addiction. It's not necessarily to harm others. It's to be self-serving. But how do you see intent with the use of perpetration or violence, conscious, unconscious, all that kind of stuff? What would you say about that?
I think that sometimes we put too much value in the concept of shame, which is extremely relevant to sex addiction, to any sort of traumatic responsive behavior where we're doing things that harm other people. The reason I think that I want to become more precise there with how I use shame as the answer for why things are happening is because when somebody says something untrue out of their mouth, even if they have a deeply ingrained habit, it's their default mode, there's still operational, functional choice at play. When somebody says, let's say the partner is a woman and this is a man, and he says, God wants you to trust me. This is ridiculous. You think that I'm cheating on you because your dad cheated on your mom. And so you need to work on your stuff. But meanwhile, he's, sleeping with her prayer partner. When that kind of a thing is occurring, that's by choice. There's agency, there's autonomy being used there. So whether or not it's influenced by shame, I prefer to define the fact that when somebody uses deception, persuasion, and exploitative behavior directly meant to conceal things that the partner would need to know for their own safety and well-being, that's abusive behavior. And that abusive behavior is done in effort to avoid the consequences. I understand that. It's often propelled by shame. I understand that, but it's intentional. And it creates a huge scaffolding from which they have much more power, much more control. And therefore, they, essentially are keeping the partner in an environment that seems as normal as possible, as safe as possible, when it's deeply, woefully unsafe, in some cases, physically unsafe, legally unsafe, who knows, the kids could be unsafe, but in more benign and typical cases, it's unsafe because there's somebody who has a serious porn problem, and no wonder they're not having sex because he's done that, he's masturbated 5 times already today, and so it just throws off kilter the entire relational reality. Or perhaps he's enacting things with her in the bedroom that are uncomfortable for her, but out of love or submission or whatever reason she wants to be available to him, because she is not aware of what else is at play. And I keep saying she, as I know this is our typical pronouns. These are our typical folks that we're working with, especially when it comes to sex addiction. But, I look at this as an infidelity issue, something much bigger than just compulsive or addictive behavior. I think really anyone can stumble into this territory. And the truth is that when I talk about it with people, it is, believe it or not, well received by the men or the folks who are doing this behavior. I have a very full caseload. I can't accept everybody who wants to talk about this stuff. And so until you try it, right, you won't be able to feel comfortable with it. There's some knack that goes into it, but that's part of my mission, is helping define the terminology. I want to create an accessible place for people who are all over the mental health realm to come to the table and be able to look at this conduct in a non-pathologizing way, but in a serious way, where we can help couples understand equity better, because I think that's what's at the heart of all of this. Once somebody's addressed their sexual issue and they're getting the therapy and the relationships moving, toward healing, there's still this remaining piece. And it's, how do you stop gaslighting? How do you stop deceiving? How do you stop holding or maintaining power, judicious power over what your partner should or shouldn't know?
And if you're just joining us, we're having a lively discussion with Hope Raye on power and control dynamics that relate to sexual secrets. So thanks for joining us. We're going to talk. So we've been talking about the betrayal violence, that term, and how it impacts. Actually, I'm curious. Tim, you're going to start talking about the healing.
Well, yeah. What's the pathway out? I mean, so when you're working with a couple and you're really walking into this experience of manipulation, exploitation, power differential as significantly as it's been, is there something that you're doing in your work with either the individuals or the couple to help them sort of find a way out? What does that treatment path look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Well, I don't have all the answers, but for, the past 10 years, I've been building what seems to be working, at least because I haven't been able to draw from anywhere else when it comes to dissolving the power and control issue that's there. So I have this piece of the betrayal violence framework called the maladaptive character traits. There are 4 of them. They stand for detachment, incongruence, regression, and entitlement, or dire. These 4 things I believe to be at the heart or undergirding all of that abusive behavior and communication. I see this almost universally across the board, that it applies to someone who's cheating and lying about it. And what they have at work underneath is detachment, incongruence, regression, and entitlement issues. Doesn't mean when I say entitlement, I'm not talking about narcissism or even grandiosity. But the idea is that we can attenuate these 4 maladaptive character traits. And we do that by working to build honesty, which increases integrity, which then enables empathy, which then makes intimacy possible, emotional intimacy.
Just for our audience, when you say regression, do you mean that they're acting at an emotional age that's younger than them, or are you meaning something different?
For the most part, yes. So each of these maladaptive character traits, I believe there's a specific wound associated with them from masculine and feminine caregivers growing up. I believe there's a certain way to motivate out of it or attenuate that thing. And I believe that each of these things has kind of their own look and feel. So I hesitate to ever really define them other than to describe how they manifest, because they show up according to someone's stable personality traits.
And so you were saying that you're working to help them embrace honesty and integrity, and I think there were some others that I've forgotten.
Yeah, empathy and emotional intimacy.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a group right now. There's 22 guys across the US, and it's a support group called Getting Dire Straight. And these guys, you wouldn't believe the sensitive material that they are hungry for. We've talked about male entitlement. We've talked about some of the most sensitive issues, misogyny or patriarchy. I mean, things that I give them a tremendous amount of credit for being open to and hungry to understand, to dissect for themselves and deconstruct. These guys are stuck. That's where I find most of the men who come to me. They have been through the big disclosures and interventions. They've been to a lot of treatment programs. And what is not working for their wife is that the newfound integrity and trustworthiness that they may have been walking in now for 2-3 years is not translating to the partner. The safety, the authenticity, the ability to know, to hold an equality mindset, to have dissolved that power and control is what these guys need help with, at least in my opinion. So when I work with them in the group, they have voracious appetites to talk about all the stuff that we essentially think is a big no-no when it comes to being not offensive or not shaming. But I think it's all in presentation. At the end of the day, these concepts make sense to them and they can own them because it makes sense.
Are most of the people that you work with men, or do these concepts show up differently in women who are
Yeah.
or in
One of the biggest liabilities with this work that I've been doing much more work around is that not so much that women will weaponize this against, say, their husbands. I suppose that does happen. I'm not hearing so much about it. And it's not so much that men can't metabolize this information and try it on for size, even if they don't like the word violence. I've heard that too. And people are allowed to accept what makes sense to them. But the part that's most tricky here is when people, particularly women who have had infidelity issues, but are also entrapped in coercive control, meaning that their partner, they're usually married to, say, a man who has, constructed a matrix of coercive control. And if she's violating fidelity, then he will weaponize this against her as a method to continue demoralizing and diminishing her. So that's the most common piece. Now, I am addressing that in the work I'm writing right now because I think that's the one area where this can get really pulled out of context. Because the truth is that a person who's in a one-down position, already subdued and subjugated, they might be doing all three pieces of betrayal, violence, conduct. But in order to hold power and control, you have to actually have access to power and control. You have to have your agency intact. You have to have the ability to abuse another person. You can cause pain and betrayal to another person. You can hurt their feelings. You can cause deep wounding and injury, but you can't effectively walk out the tactics of abusive behavior when you yourself are in that subjugated place.
Hope, tell us a bit about what you said you were doing some writing, and I know you've got the magazine. Is there in addition to the magazine?
Yeah, I'm working to, essentially address this for clinicians. I want them to be able to find this accessible and at least peruse it, if it interests them, that they can have access to definitions and terminology that might hopefully make things more cohesive, in this giant mental health realm. We have, all these different sects, and all of us are in community together. We've all trained to understand compulsive or addictive sexual behavior, but that's not all that's going on in the big world. Not everyone is a sex addict or identifies as such. And so that treatment approach can't be all that we have. It's a good and solid one, but we also have, more of a sex positive kind of sector where maybe we're not addressing some of the compulsive aspects that some people do have. We have more religious frameworks that are addressing infidelity, but there's no one meeting place. There's no hub for us to say, but what is at the crux of this conduct? And so I really do think that the glaring issue has been missed, and for millennia. Infidelity is nothing new, right? I mean, this has been going on forever. It's driving so many couples to therapy. And I think as therapists, we are so prone to our own biases, our own treatment modalities, our own approaches, and we can offer from that place. But it would be silly to think that that will universally apply to every infidelity case that we experience. So I want there to be a place for infidelity to essentially be its own field of study.
Mm-hmm. As we start, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, as we're wrapping up, Hope, if you could just give one final word of, I don't know, towards the betrayed partner or towards the perpetrator of this betrayal violence.
Yeah. I want people to know about this if it pertains to them in their relationships. Often people find it to be helpful, and for those that will find it to be helpful, I want them to have that information to help organize the experience. But for those who don't feel it's relevant to them, I want them to know about it too, because it's probably happening down the street at their neighbor's house, or in their parents' home, or their sister's home, or something like that. I do think that, you know, we shame people who are going through these issues, whether they're cheating, we shame them. We shame people who are staying with cheaters. Society has this really big, you know-it-all perspective that, you know, we would never tolerate that. Why would she stay with him? Or he's, oh, once a cheater, always a cheater. There's no nuance there. There's no potential for healing there. And when society does that, it leaves these people who are really going through this caught in the cracks. And so that's why I appreciate the work that all of you do, the incredible resources you've all put forward. I mean, these are changing people's lives. My hope is that we can zoom out now to a bigger perspective and generate more of a collective conversation where you can believe what you want to about sexual behavior and can have your own moral frameworks, but you can also talk about, you know, the issues in a more defined way. And this hopefully would improve, you know, the legal system as well.
Oh.
Thank you.
Hope, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really fascinating to talk about this. I know it's a difficult conversation topic, but I so appreciate your heart to bring this forward and not shy away from these difficult concepts.
Yeah, Dan, thank you. Thank you, all of you. I hope maybe you'll think about having me back down the line when maybe, you know, there's new questions or I have updated thoughts for you. But I just want to thank you for, you know, kind of running it through the mill of your mind and giving me a little bit of a hard time, because I so welcome that. I think that's what we need to do. You guys are awesome for doing that today.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Hope, for being here and bringing the conversation to us.
Yeah. Take care.
And if you're listening, reviewing, please like, subscribe, however you're listening. Please, if you appreciate this episode or any others, please pass it on to a friend. We always love your feedback. So I always forget the email address. So Tim is going to give it right now. What our email address, if you have questions, or we'd love to do mailbag episodes, and Tim will give you the email address.
The email address is conversations.sar@gmail.com.
Thanks
Thanks for joining us today.
Bye, everyone.